This passage begins this morning with Paul talking about a concept that when you think about it is pretty strange. The idea that we can somehow bless the Lord. Now, I have always struggled with that idea. I've always struggled with the places like Psalm 103 that was used for our call to worship this morning that begins, "Oh, bless the Lord, my soul." Now, when you think of blessing, you probably think, if you're fortunate as I am, you think of the tremendous things that you don't deserve in life that you somehow have. Again, I mentioned earlier, today is a peculiar day like that for me because I'm celebrating on this very day, at this very hour, the 10th anniversary of my wife and I adopting our son Charles, of the actual final court date where Charles turned from being my foster child into my real life son. He already was my real life son, but now it was legally recognized. So that's a blessing. That has been, and anybody that's a parent, especially who has lived through the teenage years, can understand, as we are about to finish up in just 26 months, will be no more teenagers in my house ever again. So, yes, it is a travail, but you and I both know it's a blessing. My greatest example of this, and maybe I've shared this before, is the day not too long ago where I actually got my son out of the house on false pretenses. I was going to do something real special for him. Doesn't matter what it was, but he didn't know it until it happened. And he's riding with me in the car. He's walking with me through a store. And the whole time he's a typical 17-year-old. I'm not criticizing him, who wants to be with his father about as much as he wants bamboo splints up his fingernails or something horrible like that. You'd think it was physical pain. How are you doing? And I'm not criticizing him, but I think he was thinking to himself, I don't want to be doing this right now, so I'm going to make this as miserable for my dad as I can. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, you know what? You think you're making this miserable? I am alone with my son. This is like one of the best days I'll ever remember in my whole life, no matter how much you try to make it miserable, because you are such a blessing to me. My son doesn't watch my sermons. I hope maybe someday he watches this one. Who knows? Maybe when he's old enough to appreciate it. So when I think of blessing, I think of stuff like that. I think of those moments when you realize just how fortunate you are. I have a lot of those moments at home just because I've been so lucky to be married to my wife Kathleen for almost 34 years now. Just I'm riddled with those. But how is it that it can work the other way? How is it that somehow something I do, something I say, or something about me can somehow bless the Lord? Now, theologically, it cannot. It's not possible. Let me explain. God, when you think about it, in order to be God as we understand, has to be completely self-sufficient, needing nothing, requiring nothing. And yet, God loves us. God created us not because God was lonely and needed somebody to hang out with. It wasn't that at all. It was love. It was an outpouring of love. Jesus coming to die in our place, rise again so that we would actually have life forever with God, was not done out of need. God didn't look at the broken relationship and say, I've got to fix this because I need these people back. Nope. It makes it more wonderful when you think about it that way. God simply said, I am not going to let anything stand between me and the people that I love, the people that I want to be my family for eternity. Not going to let anything stand in the way. I'll do whatever it takes. Out of love, not out of need, not out of anything codependent, nothing like that. So for God to be completely self-sufficient, it would stand to reason that things that we do are not going to add to God at all. Bless God, really, in the same sense that we get blessed. So Paul, when you kind of read between the lines here, the idea is the thanksgiving, the praise, the worship that we give to God is our way of blessing God. It's a little bit like when your toddler decides to help you with a project. You ever done a project? And I remember Charles was probably 7 or 8 before it was the first time that he could help me with something where his help didn't make it harder to do the job. Somebody say amen who's had a kid. It just, if they help you, it ends up being harder. Now, I have grown-up friends like that too, but let's just leave them out of it for a minute, okay? And I'm the kind, in my job, I have to go into different homes and I have to do some not physically demanding work, but some specific stuff where I've got to drill a hole here and there and do this. And every now and then, I remember one time in particular, when a guy who was very good with tools and with building, and he was doing stuff in his house, he decided he had to help me. That made it twice as hard. So he helped me, and he was going to help me measure. He put the hole in the wrong place. We put the hole in the wrong place because this guy decided to help. But when a kid does it, it's way worse. Can I help? Yeah. And I'll never forget, we were raking leaves one time, and Charles was helping me. And I was not feeling great that day. I don't remember if I'd hurt my back or if I was just not feeling good. And I even said I said, Charles, that really helped. And I said, I'm not just telling you that because you're my kid. That actually really made a difference. And I don't know if he actually believed me, but it did. Nowadays, he's 17, almost 18 years old. When he helps out, he really does help out. But when we try to help God, it's a little bit more like the toddler helping the father design a suspension bridge. It's not any help. So our blessing to God is very limited. So that's my little sermonette on the blessing of God, because the real meat of this is something else. It's this comfort thing. And I think we have to redefine comfort to understand what Paul is talking about. If you look at this passage we read today, you will find the word comfort no less than 10 times. It's over and over and over and over again. So we really have to understand what comfort means. Talks about deliverance too, that in a minute. But what is this comfort thing? Because we have got it wrong. We've got it so wrong. We live in a society where we have all these blessings that they did not have in the past that makes us understand comfort very differently than what Paul's talking about. For instance, when I think of comfort, I think of one particular chair in my home. Do you know what I'm talking about? You have that chair? If you don't have that chair, you need to leave this place after church today, and you need to go to a furniture store and buy one and tell them I sent you. No, what I mean, I don't really mean that. So I'm talking about something, it doesn't have to be a chair. It could be a favorite pair of shoes that when they get a hole in them and you realize you can't wear them anymore, you're devastated because they're just right. Somehow they're just right for your feet. I was in a house with a wonderful woman, just a little older than me, who's a school teacher. And she had this house built. And one of the things she did in this house was she added the option for a sunroom at the back with a handful of windows, nice and bright. And she had these favorite chairs that were super comfortable. And she was deciding between two colors for her wall. And by the way, I offered my opinion. I told her which color I liked better. I'm not totally dumb with those things, so I did. She agreed with me. She said, yeah, that was the one she thought she was going to get. But she was outfitting this room for comfort so that she could enter it and feel at peace. And it's a great idea to have that kind of a spot in your home. It really is. Even if you've got a big enough home, even a room that's just dedicated to that. I've had a lot of friends who and I don't have a specific room for this. I have something that's close, a room that's literally nothing but their prayer room. It's not for anything else in the whole house. Or book lovers will have a room that's their library. Got a comfy chair to read in and all their books. But that's not the kind of comfort he's talking about here. My favorite is definitely the jeans one. Have you ever had a pair of blue jeans that when you just got it right, you just loved it. When they came out of the washer, if you're like me, you hang them, because if you know putting them in the dryer is going to make them so they don't last as long. And you put them on for the first time because they're just your favorite. They're just perfectly comfortable. And then they get a hole and you're just devastated. Because you can buy the same one and it will take a long time before it's as comfortable. This kind of comfort is different, because this kind of comfort is basically God interceding and interjecting into whatever our discomfort is. It's very important to understand discomfort before we understand comfort. Because Paul's talking about all of his discomfort. Paul goes through a lot of horrible stuff because of his devotion to the mission of the gospel. And Paul talks about some of that here, that he's comforted despite all of this. And maybe that's the key. Maybe we have to get through that discomfort to get to the comfort that Paul is talking about. He says, "For we do not want you unaware, brothers and sisters, regarding the affliction that happened to us in the province of Asia, that we were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even of living." Really, really hard times. You and I are not going to face some of the hard times that Paul did. Paul eventually gives his life for the faith. He's imprisoned for his faith. He is whipped. He is whipped with that horrible crap that they used back then that just hurt and damaged you and ripped. Paul has been through a lot. And that's what he's talking about when he talks about his own discomfort. The other thing comfort has nothing to do with is ease and prosperity. And you know what? We make that mistake now, but they did then too. We have to remember this about this whole comfort thing. And this, I'm going to tie being comforted into being blessed, which kind of has a little bit of a happiness piece to it. But in our world, we look at the people that have everything that they need, and we figure that they are the ones who experience comfort and blessing. Even when we don't think that's what we're thinking, folks, you and I both know we do this. Sometimes we just assume somebody has done something to deserve the good things they've gotten. That's just the way we think, and that's the way they thought in the time of Paul and in the time of Jesus. These material rewards are proof of God's blessing. Look at Abraham for proof. Abraham had all of this stuff, and that was proof of God's blessing to many who read those stories. Jesus turned that upside down, though, right? Jesus comes, and in his first big sermon, in the first gospel in the book, the Gospel of Matthew, you get into chapter 5, and Jesus starts to turn everything upside down. Because the people of that time, maybe a little bit like us, knew that the people who were truly blessed in this world, had comfort in this world, were the people who had everything they needed and didn't have to go scrounging, didn't have to go begging, didn't have to wonder where their meals were coming from tomorrow. The people who were self-sufficient. Self-sufficient? Nobody's self-sufficient. That's the biggest lie that we've ever told. Nobody's a self-made person. No, have you ever fantasized about like winning the lottery so you'll never have to worry about anything again? I do this sometimes. Of course, I never buy a ticket, so I'm never going to win, and I guess that's okay. But we think about this in terms of those, if we had everything that we needed and didn't have to worry, how much more comfortable and blessed we'd be. But there's no such thing, and let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say you have everything that you need and you're hungry. Are you a farmer? No, because you're a rich man. Well, you're going to need the farmer to actually raise the crops that become the food that you eat, or raise the animals that become the food you eat, right? You need clothes, right? Well, are you a tailor? I didn't think so. So you're going to need somebody to make those clothes for you. You need internet. Okay, are you going to lay a fiber line between you and wherever that internet comes from? No, you're going to need somebody who knows how to do that. Now, some of us are more self-sufficient than others. I was in a home not too long ago that was completely gutted in one room. It was a nice home, older home. They were updating it one room at a time. And one room was completely gutted to the walls. It was an old home from the 1920s. So you know how those walls look inside with all those slats across. They're fire traps. I mean, those houses, you know. So one of the things he was doing was changing out all of the wiring, because that's how you make them safe. But he tore out all the walls. The floors were gone, ceiling, walls, everything. There was nothing in this room. And this particular individual was able to do every single thing he needed to do to turn that room back into something glorious again. And he was about to start. He had just finished that part. He was about to start putting walls up and stuff like that. And he could do it all himself. But guess what? He cannot grow the tree that creates the plank of wood that he's going to need to put wherever. He also does not own a drywall factory. He's going to have to actually buy his drywall from somebody who made the drywall. None of us are self-sufficient. And none of us are self-made, because nobody gets rich by themselves. So Jesus says, you know who's really happy? The poor. And the people are like, what? I thought these people who had everything that they needed and didn't need anybody else were the ones who were happy. Jesus says, nope, it's the poor. I can see this really ticking off the people who are in power. And you know, the other people that we sometimes think are blessed are the people who are able to basically rule. The guys in charge. The people who have the ability to decide what you are going to do, what you are going to do, what you are going to do. Jesus says, nope, it's the meek. Blessed are the meek. The ones who are going to be comforted are the meek. Those people that are in power and have everything, they're not going to be. We're starting to learn that because, you know, we start to see through that charade, and we know that people in power, no matter how good or bad they are, end up being sometimes very miserable, and maybe even because of their power. My favorite one is the one that's kind of obvious. The people who seem to have the most ease in this world and the most comfort, and therefore maybe the most blessing, are the people who are able to manipulate the system and make sure that they get ahead. The people who are, you know, even if they break the rules, they don't end up in jail. Or the people who are able to exploit people for their benefit. One of my favorite stories I've heard not too long ago is the story of the CEO of a company that shows up for work in a brand new $500,000 Italian sports car. And as he's getting out of the car, one of his managers or vice presidents or somebody is standing by, and he says, "Whoa, boss, that is a really cool car." And he says, "Yep." And he says, "If you work really hard, next year, I'll get another one." Jesus says the people that exploit are not the ones who will be blessed, but the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I think we see this sometimes. I think sometimes that the person who exploits has a much harder time getting to sleep at night than the person who has dedicated their life and even their livelihood sometimes to social justice, racial justice, reforming the system, making things better for people who don't have what they need. I have a feeling those people, even though they live hard lives, end up being much more content. So there's something behind what Jesus says. But there's another element of this that we don't understand today because we don't live in the world of these early believers. So many of these early believers came from the traditions and the religion and the people of Israel and Judaism. They're used to being pretty miserable. Historically, when they think of this comfort, when they think of this blessing, they think of deliverance, which is another thing they talk about here. Another thing that Paul talks about is deliverance. And much of our faith is rooted in this idea of deliverance. In fact, maybe all of it. Maybe this is all of it. It was a big deal. Moses led the people out, delivered them from the bondage of Egypt. Eventually, they were delivered from exile after they had had these horrible kings that ended up being such awful rulers that the people they lost their land and they were sent to a foreign land, and eventually they were delivered from exile. And the true deliverance that we needed the whole time was deliverance from our sin, from the ways that we're wrong, from the heart outwards. Deliverance from that, and that is what we got in Jesus. And that is the comfort that Paul is talking about, that Paul is bringing to people, the comfort of the good news. If our good news doesn't bring that comfort to people who are disenfranchised, to people who feel lost, to people who are poor, it's not good news at all. But Paul's good news is good news of deliverance. What do we do with that? I wonder what we do with that. Knowing that God's plan is to bring comfort, knowing that God's plan is to bring deliverance, and then figuring out that maybe we're actually God's plan to do that. Because I want to remind you that when Jesus left, he had a plan. Plan A was that the church that he built, the church that he built upon the rock of faith like Peter saying, you are the Christ, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of the living God. That church built on that rock of faith was going to be plan A. That's you and me, by the way. Plan A to bring God's comfort to a world that's full of hurting and discomfort. Do you all know what plan B is? There is no plan B. That doesn't make God a very good manager, but it makes God an amazing God. You and me, with the Holy Spirit living inside of us, we are God's plan A, and there's no plan B, to bring the comfort of the gospel to a hurting and broken world. And that's what Paul was all about. That's what Paul was willing to give his life for. That's what Paul was passionate about. And that's what Paul, you read through this passage in 2 Corinthians and you really get this. That's where Paul found his comfort. Not in an easy chair, not in a full bank account, not in a $500,000 sports car, not in the ability to do whatever he wanted to do and go wherever he wanted to go, because he couldn't do any of those things. He was captive to the will of God, and he was sent and went where God asked him to go, to bring this amazing good news of Jesus to a world that's so full of discomfort that it needs to be delivered, just like Moses delivered the people from bondage in Egypt. And you and me are the way that God does that. Now, when I say that, I get a little terrified, and maybe you should too. So let's remember. When Jesus left the world, it was so that the Holy Spirit could come into the world. That power, that gospel power of comfort, that gospel power of deliverance lives inside you already. It's already here. All we've got to do is go with confidence into the world and speak words of truth, maybe consolation, maybe sit with those who are suffering and suffer with them and find comfort with them through that. We normally like to run away from discomfort. Paul reminds us we're supposed to go through it, right into it and right through it. I challenge you in this world that you live in to find those places where people need deliverance, need comfort, and bring it to them. Sometimes that's just weeping with those who weep. That's one of the most significant things that we do. One of the things I've really noticed is when you get around somebody who is in incredible discomfort because bad things are happening, have you ever noticed, especially when they're people of faith, there's a sense of peace there? Where does that come from? That's what Paul's talking about. We go through this discomfort, and that's where we find the peace. That's where we find the blessing. That's where we find the comfort, when we go through it. And it doesn't make any sense. People that I've known that were right at the end of their life or near it, and sometimes people that I've known that have gone through really hard times, when I've looked at what God has done in their life, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. But there it is. So, brothers and sisters, let's find the places in this world, not the rich, not the well-to-do, not the powerful. Let's find the ones who actually need something, who need deliverance. Let's, you and I, go to them. Let's bring this comfort and deliverance of Jesus Christ through our words and our actions, sometimes maybe our money, and make a difference. Because we're plan A. There is no plan B. And God wants to bring comfort and deliverance. And you're the one that God's decided to use. Will you pray with me? God in heaven, thank you for this amazing opportunity to be your plan. For this amazing opportunity to show your love. For this amazing opportunity, not burden, not duty,